we testing the sound? All right. Long enough to cover the subject and short enough to keep it interesting. Welcome back to a Wednesday edition of Outta My League. See, we're off for a little bit longer, coming back from Mardi Gras. We get a little bit rusty. I get a little bit rusty. At least I have my voice back now, back from COVID, all that stuff. Jamil's back, fixing all of our problems. I'm back with an actual voice. Not going to be coughing every 2 sentences like I was at home last week. All good to go. And we've got a great show for y'all planned today. A lot of stuff happened this weekend. Brian Polian got demoted. We'll talk about that. What does that mean for LSU, not just for special teams, but also for their recruiting? A lot of moving parts there. We'll discuss. LSU, speaking of recruiting, just offered a offensive lineman in the transfer portal. We'll talk about that as well. What position does he play? How many years does he have? All that stuff. Malik Nabers, will give you an update with him getting arrested over this past weekend or Monday. We're not going to spend too long on it, but I do have some thoughts. A little bit of a fun segment, but it's really a nothing burger. But more importantly, and last but certainly not least, LSU Baseball will do a review. 4 games in, turns out this LSU Baseball team, while we didn't learn too much, because how much can you possibly learn playing Western Michigan in a midweek game versus Southern, I think we did learn that this LSU baseball team is just as talented as advertised. And we'll talk about what we learned over the weekend with LSU baseball. Be sure to hit that like button, share button, comment button, subscribe if you haven't already. If you're in the YouTube chat, we've got a poll question up. Be sure to vote on that. Give your thoughts there as well. And check us out on Spotify after the show. And like and review us on Spotify. That helps us grow the audience. Reviewing on Spotify helps us a lot. If you haven't done so already, be sure to do so. But we start today with this. Brian Kelly has indeed demoted special teams coach Brian Polian to a, quote, general manager type role, focusing on NIL and roster management in the transfer portal. I feel like either Brian Kelly listens to my show or I just made a lucky prediction. I'm going with the latter. Because I made this suggestion really the second half of last season, all throughout this offseason, that this is what Brian Kelly should do. Because it just made too much damn sense, which is not so much firing Brian Polian as your coach or just getting rid of him completely, but reassigning him to a recruiting general manager, director of player personnel, whatever, off the field role. Because, for several reasons. One, Brian Polian has objectively done a great job as the recruiting coordinator, which was also part of his responsibilities as special teams coach. Matter of fact, Brian Polian's main responsibility was the transfer portal. And LSU last year was number 3 transfer portal class in the country. And this year, they're number 1, overwhelmingly so. Now, that will be his full-time job for the most part going forward. Number 2 is Brian Polian comes from a family of NFL personnel guys and general managers, his dad being a Hall of Fame general manager, Bill Polian. So Brian Polian, when it's all said and done, despite what many of you LSU fans sort of dancing on his grave may be doing right now, Brian Polian is a valuable asset to your staff, especially to that role. And no, this is not just some low-key analyst role that Brian Kelly's doing Polian a favor. No, it's not that. This is a legitimate role that he is great in. And it's also, NIL, from my understanding, will have a lot to do with this responsibility, how to manage that aspect of it. So this is nothing to snicker at. But it's also why that I never really called for Polian to be fired, simply to be demoted. One reason is because I just don't like calling for coaches to be fired because they have families, they have kids, they get affected as well. I just don't like being that person that calls for everybody to lose their job, unless of course they're just so horrendously bad that they're hurting the program, like Ogeron was his last 2 seasons, or there's something unethical going on and just morally you just have to get rid of them, like an Art Briles at Baylor, for example. But it's not so much that it shocked me that he got demoted from special teams. What shocked me more than anything was that how bad LSU was on special teams this season. And I kept screaming this point out all season long, all off season long, is that Polian, his entire career at Notre Dame and even before at Notre Dame, was a great special teams coach. He was. I've seen those stats everywhere he's been. He broke school records at Notre Dame, 5 years, with different kickers, punters, personnel, all of that. But even before he even got to Notre Dame, for 5 years under Brian Kelly, where they went on 5 straight 10-win seasons, he had parlayed his job as a special teams coach into a head coach at Nevada. That's pretty unusual for a full-time special teams coach to parlay that into a head coach. So, for whatever reason, he was horrible at LSU. Some of that is on personnel. I'm not going to sit here and say it's all on the players, but look, Jack Besh and Malik Nabers couldn't field a punt or a kick. Well, Nick, that's coaching. Okay, sure, but Gregory Clayton could. He could field a punt and a kick. And look, there's only so many ways to teach someone how to field a punt or a kick. It's not really all that complicated. Either you can or you can't. And another thing is that, Besh, a lot of times when he did screw up, he didn't know where to line up before a kick or a punt. He was constantly in the wrong way, and Polian had to correct him right before the play started. Well, Polian didn't do a good job of teaching him beforehand. True, but why did Malik and Gregory Clayton not have problem lining up correctly in the right spot before the play started? See what I mean? Same thing goes with the punt kick protection. That was an issue against Florida State. Never had that problem the rest of the year after game 1 once you finally got in new players at that spot. So I'm not saying this is all on Brian Polian, mostly just because there's no reason to kick him in while he's down, because, coaches are better when they have better players. But at the same time, when you've been great your whole career and you become this bad overnight, you're the coach. It falls on you. The buck's got to stop somewhere. And last year was a fireable job performance. It was the worst LSU special teams has been in my lifetime. Maybe even some of you older folks' lifetime as well. Certainly going back to pre-Jerry DiNardo years. But so someone had to bite the bullet, and it had to be Brian Polian, and it's just part of the business. But good news is he's staying on in a valuable role where he can legitimately continue to help LSU in that area. And for any of you who are kind of surprised that Brian Kelly made this move, and you were praying and hoping that he would, I never really understood that fear that Brian Kelly wouldn't move on from Polian, because you thought Polian was his friend. Well, he's not going to get rid of his buddy. That's his Cam Cameron. That was always a false narrative to me. I never understood that. Polian is not Brian Kelly's Cam Cameron, because Brian Kelly does not have a Cam Cameron. I think y'all are all just snake bitten from the Les Miles and maybe even Ed Ogeron era, because, hey, just hire your buddies. Well, Nick, but Polian was the first coach that Brian Kelly hired. Well, yeah, because Brian Kelly gave first right of refusal to most of his Notre Dame staff. And Polian was the only Notre Dame staffer that decided to follow him to LSU, because everybody else got retained because Marcus Freeman got promoted from within. Not because Brian Polian was special or is a special buddy, just because he gave first right of refusal to most of his Notre Dame staff members, and he was the only one that followed. So I never really worried about Brian Kelly making changes that were needed to be made, because, as I said before, Brian Kelly demoted Mike Denbrock as his offensive coordinator at Notre Dame. And then Denbrock left to go to Cincinnati, and then now they're back together at LSU. For one reason or another, Brian Kelly demoted Mike Denbrock. And Mike Denbrock was a groomsman at Brian Kelly's wedding. They've known each other since the late 80s. And he demoted that guy. So he's known Polian for what, 5 or 6 years? What the hell does that mean? I told y'all not to worry. You have a head coach in Brian Kelly who cares about winning, not just winning a certain way that he's comfortable with or winning my way or the highway. He's a guy who cares about winning. I spoke to a former Notre Dame beat reporter who was on the beat for 7 years covering Brian Kelly. Now was at covering Florida State. Talked to him before the season opener last year. And he said Brian Kelly's the most adaptable coach he's ever seen. Most adaptable. Not as stubborn. That's what you have. As I said before, from day one, LSU fans, you can rest easy at night, knowing that you have a guy who's going to take care of every single problem that needs to be taken care of. And he took care of this one. Now, moving on. The question becomes, who is LSU's next special teams coordinator? I don't know. Hell do I know. But I will say this. It wouldn't surprise me if it happened very quickly. In other words, if the announcement came, today, later this afternoon, or tomorrow, or by the weekend. It wouldn't surprise me. Because this demotion of Brian Polian and this announcement came in late February. Came February 21st on Mardi Gras. This late into the process, it's hard to imagine Brian Kelly hasn't been on the phone talking with a lot of candidates this far into the offseason. Because I need to remind y'all, we are less than a month away from the start of spring practice. March 9th is when spring practice starts. It's February 22nd. Time to get moving. Now, Brian Kelly, at the same time, has taken his time. Use time too much. Brian Kelly has taken his time making his decisions like he has in the past. I mean, that's what he did with his staff last year, which was, hey, I'm not going to rush this. I'm going to make sure I interview everybody. True, but something tells me Brian Kelly has been working on this for several months now. So that's why I expect this to happen sooner rather than later. Also because we're less than a month away from practice. But the good news is that LSU will have their pick of the litter. This is LSU. You have the resources, you have the support, you have the branding, you're a destination job for a lot of assistant coaches and head coaches. You have everything you need, talent-wise. You're coming off of a season where you exceeded expectations. You're going into a season where you're going to be a top 10 preseason team competing for a college football playoff contention spot. And you have a head coach who has a 10-year contract who's coming off of his first season where he's still very much in favor with the administration and the fan base. So why wouldn't any coach want to come here? So you're LSU, you'll have your pick of the litter. Now, outside of an NFL guy who has absolutely no interest in coming to college football, or say Bama's special teams coordinator, or Ohio State's special teams coordinator, or Georgia's special teams coordinator. By the way, Georgia's special teams coordinator is Scott Cochran, LSU alum, U-High guy, but he's probably not moving. Point remains, outside of that, making a lateral move, or an NFL guy who doesn't want to come to college for, multiple reasons, you'll have your pick of the litter. Shouldn't worry about that. But one more thing of note concerning Brian Polian, and this has to do with the recruiting side. Some of you may not remember this or may not even have known this. Brian Polian was also LSU's recruiting coordinator. His official title was Special Teams Coach Recruiting Coordinator. Not Frank Wilson. Frank Wilson is known as this elite recruiter, but Frank Wilson is technically his title, mostly to do with him leaving McNeese and getting a huge bump in pay, is running backs coach, assistant head coach. Brian Polian was Special Teams Coach Recruiting Coordinator. Who will that be going forward? Well, Shea Dixon of On3 Sports is reporting that Frank Wilson is most likely going to be taking on that title / responsibility of recruiting coordinator. So now he'll be pulling triple duty as running backs coach, assistant head coach, which is really just a bump in title for pay reasons, and recruiting coordinator, which is something that, of course, Frank Wilson knows a hell of a lot and has that responsibility under Les Miles at LSU. So I don't think anybody here at LSU or any LSU fan is going to be mad at that movement, naming Frank Wilson recruiting coordinator. But what is something else to keep in mind, though, is that Billy Embody, who also works for On3, works with Shea Dixon, is also reporting that LSU and Brian Kelly have been looking to stay more regional in recruiting, especially going forward. To start off, Brian Kelly had to kind of use his national relationships because he came from Notre Dame and he recruited nationally, especially with Brian Polian as recruiting coordinator, recruiting nationally. So they had to go more national when it came to transfer portal and high school guys, especially these last 2 cycles. One, because they were on short notice, and 2, because they just had to fill out the roster to win games. So they kind of had to, hey, just get players on the field that can play and give us depth and help us out. That's what you had to do. But now that you've kind of settled in at LSU, Brian Kelly is going to make a point, a huge point, at staying regional more than he has the past 2 cycles. Now, he knows Louisiana is important, and he knows Houston and East Texas is that's a given. But more specifically, Mississippi, Bama, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, maybe even the Carolinas to some extent. He's going to be staying in that Southeast regional footprint when he needs guys that are outside of the Louisiana-Houston territory, more than ever. Now, at the same time, look, if Deshaun Womack, who was your highest-rated signee, he's out of Maryland, Baltimore, or I can't remember if it's Baltimore or Washington, D.C., whatever, from Maryland. If he wants to take a visit, if a 5-star, the number 1 edge rusher in the country wants to take a visit to your campus, well, yeah, you let him. You let him come on. Don't be stupid here. But going forward, Brian Kelly came to LSU for a lot of reasons. And one of those reasons, and he said this multiple times, is the regional recruiting advantage. Not having to go across the country and try and build relationships from New Jersey to Los Angeles to Hawaii to Miami and everywhere else in the Midwest. That's one of the advantages. Why not take advantage of that? And that's why also, speaking of the next special teams coach, why maybe the next special teams coach will most likely have ties to the Southeast region and not necessarily a national recruiter, kind of like, like Brian Polian was, or kind of like Kerry Cooks was, who was also with him at Notre Dame, or who's Robert Steeples, the cornerbacks coach, who's from Missouri, played at Memphis, I believe. Somebody with Texas, Louisiana, Georgia, Florida kind of ties. That wouldn't surprise me going forward. So we'll see. Speaking of reasons why you come to LSU, Malik Nabers. This is going to make sense in a minute. Malik Nabers was arrested on Monday, as most of you know, in New Orleans for possession of a firearm. Honestly, when I first saw this, sure, you go, oh, shit, great. One good thing happens, but then you hear about another bad thing happens. Just another day in the life of an LSU fan. But then after the initial shock went away, I kind of went, he didn't shoot anybody, so I'm not really worried about this too much, considering when it happened. It's February. He got arrested. Season starts in September. If he does have to do community service and does get charged and all that stuff, he'll do his community service, but he'll be ready for fall camp. No problem, no harm, no foul. Do some up-downs. End of discussion. Turns out that's not going to be the case either. Comes out today that the charges against Malik Nabers have been dropped. The report that was released by Michael Cobble of WBRZ Channel 2 here in Baton Rouge, the reason being was, quote, the state refused charges with the condition that Nabers not get his gun returned to him. So the state of Louisiana and the DA's office said, we won't charge you as long as you agree that you don't get your guns back, or a gun. I think it was just one. So there you go. Malik's out. And also the bail was $0.00. So it turns out to be a big nothing burger for Malik Nabers. Or maybe John Bell Edwards called the New Orleans district attorney and said, bro, get your shit together. Bama players get caught with guns and weed in Birmingham and in other places in Alabama all the time, and they get off scot-free. What the hell are we doing? We want to win. I joke, of course. Sort of. But this is supposedly, I talked to some people who are from New Orleans who follow the politics of New Orleans and all that stuff. I certainly don't. Supposedly they say that the new DA in New Orleans, for the most part, this is kind of a new police policy. From what I'm told, they're not as stingy on gun control. Like if you get caught with a gun, they'll let you go, but you can't have the gun back. You have to tell us where you got it from. If you do all that, we'll let you out. So maybe that's the case, whatever. But Malik, he's fine. Just don't bring guns, don't carry guns anymore, and I'll be good. But I will say this, though, going back to Brian Kelly, he must be so happy he doesn't have to suspend Malik at school. Because if this was at Notre Dame, the Catholic Church probably would have stepped in and be like, no. He's got to serve his penance. Got to say 10 Hail Marys and, do community service and not play for a couple of games and all that other stuff. Whatever. That's what Notre Dame would have made him do. At LSU, do some up downs after practice one day, and you're good. Benefits of being the head football coach at LSU. Everything's at your fingertips. Nick Saban don't have to worry about this crap. Kirby Smart don't have to worry about this crap. Jimbo don't have to worry about this crap. Places at Oregon, for example, with Nike, they don't have to worry about this crap. Brian Kelly, your hard work has paid off at Notre Dame. Now you get to reward all that with being in a place like LSU. You get to work with the same bullets that Nick Saban does. No pun intended. All right, with that, let's take a break. Be sure to hit that like button, share button, comment button, subscribe if you haven't already, and check us out on Spotify. When we come back, we'll do an LSU baseball review, what we learned, what we didn't learn, what's impossible to learn after one weekend and one midweek game against not-so-great competition. But there's some interesting things that I think we'll learn going forward, because for the most part, we knew who was talented and who wasn't. It's just now, what order do we have? And also, LSU, as I said, LSU Football gave a new offer out to a portal player. We'll discuss who that is, what does he bring to the table, and does LSU have a shot? We'll discuss all that next. Don't go anywhere here on Outta My League.
Hey, Baton Rouge, traveling through Natchez, Mississippi, whether you need to fill up your vehicle or your belly, stop by Go-Mart and On The Go Deli. Go-Mart has clean restrooms, community coffee, an awesome beer cave, and a great selection of anything you might need on your trip. So stop by Go-Mart at 4 Sergeant Furnace Drive as you're entering Natchez on the left, and visit Tom and Wright Granning and their awesome team at Go-Mart.
We're all from different places and backgrounds. We've each experienced our own versions of life, but in the end, we're all the same team. I'm part of that, along with these players in purple and gold.
Sean Buddha, Malik Nabers, Miles Frazier,
Kyron Leeson,
Greg Brook.
Whether on the field or in the courtroom, your team matters.
So join our team.
Make a difference.
Bet. Let's get it done.
It is time to trade in your isolation for celebration, to break out and get away. And at Baton Rouge Metro Airport, you'll get away a lot quicker. BTR is way closer, more convenient, with easy parking, check-in that's a breeze, and non-stops and short hops to anywhere you want to go. So get back to your life and be quick about it. Baton Rouge Metro Airport. It's about time. FlyBTR.com.
I'm good. All right, welcome back to Out of My League. Hit that like, share, and comment button and subscribe. LSU football, speaking of all the stuff we're talking about with recruiting and transfer portal stuff and Brian Polian now that being his full-time job, they have sent out a new offer to a transfer portal player. LSU offered Maryland graduate transfer offensive lineman Mason Lunsford on Wednesday. The Tigers are clearly still on the hunt for offensive line depth. For those of you wondering, Lunsford, how good is he? He announced 4 days ago that he would be leaving the program to play out his final 2 seasons of eligibility. Lunsford was a full-time starter in all 13 games in 2021 at tackle, and then moved to left guard last season in 2022, where he started 12 out of the 13 games. He announced on Twitter that he was leaving, saying, "Dear Terps, I want to thank the University of Maryland and the entire Maryland community for giving me a shot to play at my football dream school." He's been there for 4 years and has 2 years left of eligibility as a graduate transfer. He's an interior offensive lineman. He has offers out from Arkansas, Louisville, Houston, James Madison, and a few others. So LSU's biggest competition right now seems to be Arkansas and Louisville. But it's very, very clear that seeing as he moved to left guard, let's see how tall he is. 3-star prospect in 2019, 6'5", 305 pounds. Built more like a tackle, but has played offensive guard and was a full-time starter the last 2 years on a Maryland team that was actually improving the last 2 years in the Big Ten. But it's very clear that LSU is still looking for interior offensive linemen. I don't know if this guy can play center because that's what LSU was looking for from the Miami transfer, the Cincinnati transfer, who they ended up going elsewhere. Hold on. All right, sorry. People need to stop texting me during my show. LSU was looking for a center, one from Cincinnati, one from Miami. Obviously, they've moved forward with other people, but they're still looking for interior offensive linemen. You may think, well, what's the issue with offensive line? That should be a problem solved for the most part, especially at guard and tackle. True, but you also have to understand that right now in spring practice, and Mason Lunsford, I would imagine, although he's a graduate transfer, so maybe that could be different, I would imagine that the reason why they're offering him is because he could be available for spring practice. Because if you remember, Jaden Daniels was available for spring practice because he had graduated from Arizona in December of 2021. So he was available to come in late, like a week or two before spring practice started, early into February and March. So maybe that's the case with Mason Lunsford. But LSU right now doesn't have a full roster of offensive linemen to practice fully in a spring game for spring practice right now. Now they have a bunch of guys coming in late, but as of right now, they're still lacking depth for spring practice and scrimmages specifically. So that's maybe part of the reason, not so much looking for guys to build depth or looking for guys to add competition, which, look, if you do that, great. I think it's also just having a backup plan and having enough guys to practice properly. I mean, so much of winning games is how you practice and how you prepare. Well, right now in spring practice, second year in a row, you're still quite not there with LSU, especially on the offensive line. Now, during fall camp, none of that's going to be an issue. Whether you get this guy or nobody out of the transfer portal, that's not going to be the issue for LSU going into fall camp. But right now, that's still not the case. LSU's still not quite where they need to be with the roster spot going into the spring period. So we'll see what he does. But right now, I mean, LSU is... If your competition is Arkansas and Louisville and Houston and James Madison, those are his best offers, I would imagine that you're in the running for Mason Lunsford. Or maybe if you're Mason Lunsford, it doesn't matter if LSU's the best program that's offering you at the highest level. Maybe it's just more about playing time. Maybe that's what it is. And NIL money and being developed and whatever other reason. He's leaving home and he's leaving a place that he was starting, so clearly playing time and being close to home wasn't the issue. Whatever his issue is, maybe LSU can offer it, but certainly prestige-wise, LSU has the best offer that Mason Lunsford has out of Maryland. All right, let's move over to baseball. Thank God baseball started. God, I mean, just having bad basketball with the men's and having the women just blow out everybody for the most part and then getting blown out by South Carolina, just getting kind of boring. It's nice to have some actual baseball games go on and have one of the most talented teams in the country, all this anticipation, and have a game every other day. From my point of view, certainly not just the fans, but from my point of view, it's definitely refreshing, something more to talk about. So there were a lot of things to take away from the opening weekend and the midweek game yesterday on Tuesday against Southern. One of those is that Western Michigan and Southern are not very good. Okay? How much to take from what we kind of already know? Not much. But here's what we do know, is that the starting pitching, definitely going into this, is that it was going to be way better than what it was last year. We knew that. But boy, it was nice to see it in action. Paul Skeens, that's the first thing, I think the biggest takeaway that we all saw this past weekend, these first 4 games. Paul Skeens is a horse. A frickin' horse. A bona fide ace. It feels so good. I mean, I know you had Landon Marceau a couple of years ago, and he was a legitimate SEC pitcher, but it just feels so great to have that horse on Friday night in an SEC matchup, knowing you can rest your head at night knowing everything's going to be okay. Everything's being taken care of on the mound. Feels good to have that back at LSU Baseball. It's been a while. Skeens showed it, man. I mean, not just his performance in the shutout and having 12 strikeouts and 6 innings. It was really the fact that Paul Skeens threw 99 miles per hour on his 97th pitch. 96th and 97th pitch. He ended up throwing 98 pitches. He threw 99 miles per hour on his last few pitches. His last pitch was 98 miles per hour. He never once lost his velocity. And it wasn't just like he was throwing fastballs and couldn't able to do anything else, off-speed pitches and stuff like that. It's just, he's just that strong and that good and that durable. And he had high velocity the entire game. It's not like he started at 99 and then, slowly bumped down to 96, 95, 94, 93. It was consistent all the way through. I mean, he had the most strikeouts in a game since Landon Marceau 2 years ago in 2021. And he was everything you hoped it would be. The other thing, at least the thing that I was most interested in seeing outside of Paul Skeens, was the rest of the pitching, especially starting pitching. And that was Chase Shores, who was projected to be a starting pitcher as a true freshman. Started on Sunday, and he has all the right stuff, as advertised. Only pitched 3 innings. He's going to develop as the season goes along, but he's going to be a good one. And he's going to develop with the best pitching coach in the country in Wes Johnson. But he's going to be, I think, a nice day 3 starter. We'll take his lumps, I'm sure. He's a freshman, and the lineups you're going to see in the SEC, that's, he's going to have his bad days, but he's a good guy to have, a good freshman to have as your day 3 starter, because he's only going to get better as the season goes along, and really, he's going to be full strength and ready to go and shake off all that freshman rust by the time May kicks around, which is really when the most important part of the season begins. So you have one of the best Friday night starters in the country, not just in the SEC. And you have plenty of guys to work with on Sunday, even if it's not Chase Shores. But the biggest question now, I think, and I left this in the poll question, is who's going to be LSU's Saturday starter? Who's going to be their Saturday guy on the mound? I think there's several options, but it's starting to look like the loss of Grant Taylor may have been a bigger deal than I probably led it on to be, than I thought, that at least I told you. And the thought was that you put Grant Taylor as a relief pitcher long term. What I had heard what was going to happen was that Grant Taylor was going to be starting off as the Saturday night starter the first couple of weeks against Western Michigan and then against the Round Rock Classic against Iowa, I believe. He was going to start off as Saturday. And then Thatcher Hurd was going to start off in the midweek for the first couple of weeks, and then they were going to do the old switcheroo, or at least put Grant Taylor back in the bullpen as a weekend relief pitcher, and then Thatcher Hurd being a full-time Saturday night starter. And the reason why they wanted to do that is because they wanted Thatcher Hurd to be the midweek pitcher in time for Texas, and then rest him and then make him a weekend starter for the rest of the season. Well, here's the thing. That still is going to happen. And Grant Taylor certainly is out for the season, so he's not going to be in that equation either. But Thatcher Hurd yesterday against Southern didn't look so hot. Now, unlike some of you, LSU fans, I'm not going to panic after the first midweek game of the season. I'm not. Because here's the thing about Thatcher Hurd. He broke several UCLA records for strikeouts per inning as a true freshman. And in case any of you don't know, UCLA has had a lot of great pitchers, a lot of first-round pitchers come out of that program just even the last decade plus. Not even throughout their whole history, just decade plus. They've had some great ones. Maybe more so than about any SEC program there is. He had 10 walks in 38 innings last season as a true freshman at UCLA. He had 3 walks in less than 2 innings against Southern. So he had almost a third of that in 2 innings of total walks than what he had total last season in 38 innings. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that his performance against Southern is not indicative of who he is. It's no big deal. Now, the question becomes, well, why did Hurd struggle? Because it's baseball. Shit, I don't know. Things happen. I mean, Dylan Cruz is going to have an error eventually. Dylan Cruz is going to have a bad weekend. I haven't seen it, but he'll eventually have it in his career. I mean, Hurd, think about it. Thatcher Hurd is coming off of a bad back injury, a bad one. So probably there's a little bit of rust. Also, there's a little bit of nerves coming in. He only pitched 38 innings at UCLA before he got hurt. And I'm also going to go out on a limb and say that of those innings that he pitched when he was in high school, of those innings that he pitched at UCLA, that Tuesday against Southern and Alec Box was probably the biggest crowd that he's ever pitched in front of. And it's his first game coming back off of a long injury. He was probably a wee bit nervous. So that's something to consider. But also something to consider is that during fall ball, and during preseason scrimmages leading up to opening weekend, Thatcher Hurd went up against maybe the best lineup in college baseball that we've seen in 3 decades. That's not hyperbole, and I'll explain that later, but the best lineup that maybe college baseball has seen in 3 decades, and he looked dominant in fall ball and in preseason scrimmages. So there's and plus we saw what he did in season last year at UCLA against pretty decent competition. So we'll see. I'm going to chalk this up to rust and all this other stuff, but we'll see how he does against Texas next Tuesday. Christian Little, here's another name we can consider for a Saturday starter. He looked awesome Friday in relief pitching and Tuesday as a relief pitcher. So much so that Jay Johnson was asked about, are you actually going to keep Christian Little as a relief pitcher? And Jay Johnson's response was, well, we'll see. We're not sure yet. They're open to all options. We could see Christian Little later on as a starter. He got you out of a bad pinch against Southern yesterday. 3 strikeouts, no hits in 2 innings, also on Friday. Great performance in relief for Paul Skeens. But the other option that I put up on the poll is Ty Floyd, who was awarded the win on Sunday in relief for Chase Shores. Ty Floyd gave up no hits, no walks, 4 strikeouts in 3 innings. It's a pretty good day. And he has shown improvement in his command and his off-speed pitches after finishing last season strong, being a starter in the postseason. He really came on as your second starter to kind of give some sort of, I don't want to say relief because that he's not a relief pitcher, but some sort of, relief off of Mikhail Hilliard last year, who was really your only true starting pitcher in the SEC play. Ty Floyd emerged in the postseason against Tennessee and then in the Hattiesburg Regional, and he's continued to improve even more under Wes Johnson in the short amount of time from what we've seen in fall ball scrimmages and this past week. But no one is writing off Thatcher Hurd. Look, I'm simply giving you an option for what could be on Saturday night starters. No one's writing off Thatcher Hurd. Matter of fact, I think he'd be stupid. I'd be stupid to do that, especially coming off of a back injury in 1 midweek game. But unlike last year, LSU just has so many options in the bullpen. So many options. Now let's move on to hitting. I'll say this. It's going to be even harder than it was last year for pitchers to decide who they're going to throw on LSU's lineup. They have to pitch to somebody. They can't just keep on walking everybody. They can't keep hitting everybody because LSU led the country, or at least the SEC, in runners hit by pitch last year. I mean, partly just because pitchers just don't know where to throw it. They don't know. You can't keep walking everybody. You can't keep throwing strikes to Dylan Cruz and then Tommy White and then Jared Jones and then Braden Jobert and then Gavin Duke. I mean, you just can't. You have to pitch to somebody. So it's either a walk, it's either a home run or a hit, or it's probably going to be a hit by pitch. It's going to be an issue for a lot of teams. Teams are going to have a tough time making up their minds of who they're going to pitch to. Now let's bring up to the Tommy White injury before we get to the whole hitting stuff. Sigh of relief, he's only out for 1 week. The good news is that going forward, this has happened before with Tommy Tanks. Happened last year at NC State as a freshman. I think he also said it happened in high school once before. So this is not an unusual thing. He ended up hitting 27 homers last year, so it's no big deal. This is just a thing with Tommy Tanks that has happened over and over and over again. And he's just one of those certain athletes where, a certain bone or a certain joint just pops out of socket a lot, and you just have to pop it back in. No real damage is ever done. It just happens with a lot of certain athletes. But the good news is that he's not going to be out for 2 or 3 months, anything like that. But even if Tommy Tanks had been out for 2 or 3 months, I honestly wouldn't have been too worried about LSU. I mean, I would have sucked because I wanted to see Tommy Tanks in action and see extra gorilla ball and see the dominance that would have been LSU's lineup. But you got plenty of offense. You do. It would have been a hell of a lot worse if the injury would have been to, say, Paul Skeens or Ty Floyd or Thatcher Hurd or Christian Little or Chase Shores. That would have worried me. If one of them would have gotten hurt, even if it was just Chase Shores, the freshman, that would have really concerned me more because you had plenty of offense last year, and all of that's returning and then some. You needed pitching. So good news is you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. As far as the lineup is concerned, who do I like so far? Look, it's 4 games. It's hard to predict exactly how everyone's going to react going forward. We know about Tommy Tanks. We know about Gavin Dugas. We know about Dylan Cruz. All those returners, we know they can hit. But going forward, as far as who I like, Brady Neal is your starting catcher. He just is. Look, I understand that they talked about Milazzo being a catching by committee kind of thing, where when you face left-handed pitchers, he would come in or vice versa, whatever. No, it's not going to be by committee. Brady Neal is going to be your full-time starter. Unless he gets hurt or there's some sort of pitch hitting situation, whatever. Because here's the thing, Jay Johnson likes his offense. And Brady Neal is already he's a better hitter than Milazzo. He's just as good of a hitter as probably Travinsky. But also, he's a better defensive catcher than anything you had last season. It's not really that big of an accomplishment to say, but he has that. You can see that already. So Brady Neal is your starting catcher in your lineup going forward, especially in SEC play. Again, I'm looking towards SEC play. As far as second base is concerned, y'all, just keep Gavin Dugas in the lineup. I mean, I'm not going to keep him DH because we'll talk about that in a little bit, but Gavin Dugas has got to be your starting second baseman. He batted .700 on the week. Again, 1 week, but point remains, he's a guy who led the SEC in RBIs in 2021. And he is still red hot coming off of the last 2 seasons. He is more than capable in the infield at second base. More than capable. I just have a hard time seeing him not being in the lineup for Jay Johnson. Tommy White, as I said, he's coming back to play third base. If he can't throw quite as well as he once was for whatever reason, but he can still hit, which is what happened last year with him, then sure, he'll stay at DH. But until I see anything further, Tommy Tanks is staying at third, Gavin Dugas at second, Brady Neal is your catcher, Jordan Thompson staying at shortstop. I just think Napolt and Jack Merrifield, they're going to be the odd man out here. Now, they can help in defensive replacements and stuff like that, or if anybody else gets hurt, or depending on who you're facing that day on the mound, sure, but Napolt and Merrifield, odd men out. They're nice players. Good defenders. Probably, better defenders certainly than Gavin Dugas and Tommy White, but they can't hit like Gavin Dugas can. And I just know what Jay Johnson believes, and I know what he likes. And Gavin Dugas is more than, again, he's a good second baseman on defense, but he's elite at hitting. He's a great SEC hitter. The only one that I think potentially could updo Napolt Merrifield and maybe even Gavin Dugas, the potential is all on Gavin Guidry, the freshman, at second base. He made probably the best defensive play of the week against Southern. Plus, he batted .500, didn't get too many at-bats, only got 2 at-bats. But I would say if anybody were to take the spot away at second base, or even third base, depending on what happens with Tommy Tanks going forward, it's not going to be Napolt or Merrifield. It's going to be Gavin Guidry. He's a draft eligible sophomore a year from now. He damn near almost left Louisiana, the state of Louisiana, for the draft this past year. The only reason why he stayed at LSU is because, one, NIL, but two, he's from Louisiana. He's from Lake Charles, and he grew up dreaming of playing LSU baseball. Other than that, this dude would be in the pros right now. So Gavin Guidry's your future starting shortstop, second baseman, whatever, and it wouldn't surprise me if he becomes a starter later this season. The big question, though, that I have for for who's going to play in the field and who's going to be in the lineup is outfield and DH. Do you keep Jobert at DH, or do you put him out in the outfield in front of, say, Pearson or, well, probably Paxton Kling, because it's a right fielder? Do you keep Jobert at DH, or do you put him in place of the freshman Paxton Kling? What do you do? Because here's the problem. Maybe the most impressive-looking hitter this weekend. I understand Tommy White and Dylan Cruz, as far as power-wise, they're the best. But the most impressive-looking hitter is the freshman Jared Jones, a.k.a. Mark McGuire, according to Jay Johnson. He may also be the most powerful hitter on the team outside of Dylan Cruz, and maybe even Tommy Tanks. That dude is massive. He is huge. He looks like a Mark McGuire as an 18-year-old freshman. I just have a really hard time, bro, you can't just take that guy off a DH. I don't see him playing in the field right now. He's definitely a DH, but, think about this. Maybe you switch DH roles with Jobert and Jones, depending on the pitcher you're facing each day. That seems more likely. But now that I think about what I just said, though, think about what I'm saying. Think about how talented this LSU team really is. Braden Jobert hit 18 homers last year. And for a guy who hit 18 homers last year in Jobert, we are debating about whether or not he should be in the lineup every single day. A guy who hit 18 frickin' home runs for you last year. It's maybe he'll be in the lineup every day. Maybe not. We'll see. I just don't think we're realizing how talented this team is. I think we were told that, hey, this is the most talented college baseball team in 30-plus years. But now that we're seeing it, that point just kind of hits home a little bit more every single day. I mean, Jay Johnson must be pinching himself. What the fuck do I have? I have a guy who hit 18 home runs, and I'm having a hard time of whether or not I can see him being in the lineup full-time every single weekend. It's crazy. It's crazy. And now also, by the way, now you see why it's so important for Paul Skeens to just be a pitcher for LSU and not to be a utility player at DH. Now you see. Now, one thing I will say, we're going to overreact. All these things are subject to change. Again, we thought Blake Money was a top 5, top 10 starting pitcher in the SEC after one weekend last year. Then look what happened. So we'll see. But I guarantee you this, we'll find out a whole hell of a lot more about this LSU baseball team this time next week after the Round Rock Classic this weekend, and then playing in Austin, Texas against the Texas Longhorns next Tuesday. So we'll find out a whole lot more about that. All right. Be sure to hit that like button, share button, comment button, subscribe if you haven't already. When we come back, college football is proposing new rules. We'll discuss them later. Don't go anywhere. Be back right after this.
Hey, Baton Rouge, we're traveling through Natchez, Mississippi. Whether you need to fill up your vehicle or your belly, stop by Go-Mart and On The Go Deli. Go-Mart has clean restrooms, community coffee, an awesome beer cave, and a great selection of anything you might need on your trip. So stop by Go-Mart at 4 Sergeant Prentice Drive as you're entering Natchez on the left, and visit Tom and Wright Granning and their awesome team at Go-Mart.
We're all from different places and backgrounds. We've each experienced our own versions of life, but in the end, we're all the same team. I'm part of that team. along with these players in purple and gold.
Sean Buddha, Malik Nabers, Miles Frazier,
Kyron Lace. Whether on the field or in the courtroom, your team matters.
So join our team. Make a difference. Bet. Let's get it done.
It is time to trade in your isolation for celebration, to break out and get away. And at Baton Rouge Metro Airport, you'll get away a lot quicker. BTR is way closer, more convenient, with easy parking, check-in that's a breeze, and non-stops and short hops to anywhere you want to go. So get back to your life and be quick about it. Baton Rouge Metro Airport. It's about time. FlyBTR.com.
All right, welcome back to Out of My League. Let's see if people voted on the poll question. Who will be LSU's starting pitcher on Saturdays, if you had to pick right now? The options were Thatcher Hurd, Ty Floyd, Christian Little, and other. 37% of you said Christian Little, 26% Thatcher Hurd. Nobody said Ty, well, only like 16% said Ty Floyd. All right, so mostly Christian Little with Thatcher Hurd or someone else. Yeah. I mean, look, it's all about what have you done for me lately. And right now, Christian Little looked like the best. Surprised Ty Floyd didn't get more love on that. But, you know, look, Thatcher Hurd's got the most potential out of all of them. He just had one bad game. But I still expect Thatcher Hurd to be vying for that Saturday starting spot moving forward. It is really hot in here. I'm sweating. I was just talking to Jamil about this during the break. I mean, wintertime in Louisiana is almost worse than summertime because the weather is so goddamn bipolar. It can't make up its mind if it's hot or if it's cold. I wake up one morning, it's cold. I wear winter clothes. I go outside. All of a sudden, it's 80 degrees again, and I'm sweating my ass off. What's worse is that because the weather's bipolar, everyone's air conditioning units, mine especially the one in here, is also bipolar because it can't make up its damn mind. Oh, is it hot or is it cold? Do I stay on? Do I stay off? Do I go? You know, just can't stop. It's that winter mugginess. Ugh. I'd rather just pay the high utility bill during the summer months because at least the air conditioning units during the summer in Louisiana know to stay the fuck on the entire time. Oh, it's really hot outside. I'll just keep blowing that wind. As opposed to this where it's just off and on, sweating all over the place profusively. Anyways, spring is right around the corner. Spring, hope springs eternal. Springs are actually really gorgeous in Louisiana. I think I've just started to realize that as I've gotten older. All right, be sure to hit that like button, share button, comment button. I did very little to no preparation on this last segment, but it is something that I do want to talk about. Ross Dellinger, let me give credit where credit's due, our guy for Sports Illustrated, everyone's favorite former LSU beat reporter, came out with a report that college football commissioners are considering changes to shorten the games, specifically rule changes that would include game clock continuing to run after incomplete passes that could be implemented, by the way, not in the future, but near future. This season. There's been sort of a year-long effort in exploring ways to shorten college football games, especially as it's entering kind of the fourth quarter. Many people, high-ranking officials, have proposed 4 rules. The first rule is prohibiting consecutive timeouts, as like icing the kickers, multiple things like that. Like, look, if you have to call multiple timeouts because you can't get the right play in, you're just incompetent and you suck. That part I agree with, mostly because that's what got Ed Ogeron and his offensive staff fired in 2021, but that's neither here nor there. That I'm okay with. It does take away some of the strategy a little bit, but consecutive timeouts, yeah, that's kind of annoying. I'm not going to lie. It's kind of like these new rules in baseball, which, boy, by the way, did you see how quickly the baseball games went this weekend for LSU? I mean, one, yes, when you have better pitching than you did last year, especially starting pitching, that helps. But it's not so much about the length. It was the pacing. Pacing was so nice. Look, sports is all about entertainment. You think it's all about learning life lessons and making money. Yeah, you make money and all that other stuff, and sure, you can learn life lessons if you play it. But at the end of the day, the reason why a sport exists is for entertainment. Why did somebody invent the game of baseball? Well, because they were bored and they took one game and made it their own. Why did somebody continue playing the sport that they played? Because it was fun. Why'd you play football instead of basketball? Well, I like football better. Why'd you play hockey instead of field hockey? Ice hockey instead of field hockey? Well, because I liked one more than the other. It was more fun. This is all about entertainment. So with all these new rule proposals to shorten games, to make the pace of the play better, and all these people clamoring, well, you're just doing this for money. You damn straight we are. Because it's all about having fun. It's all about shortening and making things, legible or aesthetically pleasing to today's modern audiences. Games change as the seasons change. Games change as the years change. I don't have any issues with it. Now, the consecutive timeouts thing, yeah, I'm okay with that. So far, so good. This second one, I'm not really sure I understand. Again, very little preparation for this. The second rule that was proposed in college football was no longer extending a first or third quarter for an untimed down if the quarter ends on a defensive penalty. So the down would be clocked starting the next quarter. Okay. Oh, I see what they're saying. Okay. All right. Well, that I'm kind of okay with. But those are the ones that are probably little incremental changes, that, according to Ross Dellinger, that will only save like a fraction of the time. But the other two are what really got people up in a bunch. And that was to, let's see, damn it, see if I can find it, was to have the clock will continue to run after an offense gains a first down, except for inside the last 2 minutes of the game. So if you're in the last 2 minutes of the game, you're in a 2-minute drill, you got to go down and score to tie or win the game, you will be rewarded the clock stopping if you gain a first down. That I'm okay with. That I'm actually more than okay with. That's what they do in the NFL. I think outside of the 2-minute stuff, with getting a first down, the clock doesn't stop if you get a first down, even if it's in the last 2 minutes in the NFL. I think the only thing that matters is the last 2 minutes of the halves, that if you run out of bounds, then the clock stops. Then you just keep on going. That I'm also a big fan of as well. But as far as keeping the first downs and going inside 2 minutes, that I have no issue with. Honestly, I never really understood why that was a rule to begin with. Because the whole purpose of getting a first down inside 2 minutes was to reward the fact that, hey, you get to reset, the clock stops briefly until they get the marker back down. There's no reason to have that keep going on in the first quarter with, 40 minutes left, 2 hours left, or whatever in the game. Never made any sense to me. So yeah, that I'm all for, because the benefit of stopping everything on first down, on the first play in the second quarter makes absolutely no sense. So that's something they should have gotten rid of a long-ass time ago, but they just never bothered to. But here's the one that's way more controversial, and that's this. The clock will continue to run after an incomplete pass once the ball is spotted for play. So in other words, if you throw an incomplete pass, it basically now acts as what a first down would have. So a first down in the past, or what it's been always for college football, you get a first down, the clock stops briefly, and then as soon as they set the ball and reset the change, the clock starts running again. This is how an incomplete pass would now be treated. Instead of it stopping completely until you snap the ball again, it's now going to be stopped for a brief period until they reset the down marker or reset the ball on the line of scrimmage. I got to say, I'm for it. I really am. 7 to 9 plays would be taken away per game. So it would probably be 7 to 9 less plays per game if you just did the first down rule, where the clock would continue to run if you get a first down. But if you were to do a running clock rule after an incomplete pass, that would eliminate more than twice the amount of plays, 7 to 9. So 7 to 9, if you just get rid of the first down stuff, if you add this incomplete pass rule, it would be more like 20 less plays per game in college football if you did that. But now people may think, well, that's great. More games could be played in a day. Safety reasons, which is really what this is being sold as, safety reasons for college football. You don't play as many plays, less likely to get hurt. Plus, college football is adding more games with the expanded college football playoff, which is really why this whole thing is being kicked off now. But another thing that this is going to do, another, I guess, unforeseen consequence that is now being foreseen, is that if you implement these two rules, especially that incomplete pass thing part, they don't necessarily do tempo like Oregon did with Chip Kelly back in 2010 or 2011, 2012 during that era. But most people are kind of going what LSU did, for example, with Brian Kelly last year, kind of a muddle huddle. Everybody's kind of doing the muddle huddle kind of a thing. This would force more teams to go a lot quicker, a lot quicker. So it really isn't so much about shortening the plays. It's more about the product that you're seeing on the field, the pacing of play. It also, the television commercials won't be impacted for time at all, because the offenses would already operated in a hurry-up mode, which would move to a super turbo, and that potentially negates the elimination of plays and heighten the risk of injury. So as far as this actually helping anything that it sets out to do with player safety and all this other stuff, no, it doesn't. It creates a better product, shorter amount of time, more plays, and if you add more plays in a shorter amount of time, it actually increases the risk of injury. Better product, better television rights, more games, more plays in a shorter amount of time. It's a better product. I have no issue with it. I think a lot of people right now are saying, oh, this is so evil. How could you do this? This is not about player safety, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I understand the spirit of player safety. I do. I get it. But we got to stop with this whole crap of, well, you could add more games. You could add more plays. You could add more this. What are you doing to these players? The players know what they're freaking getting into. They're adults. You whined and complained that you couldn't give them NIL money, which I was for, by the way. I've been for this whole time. Because you said, oh, they're adults. They should have the right to transfer wherever and whenever they want to. They should have the right to get paid by whoever and whenever and how much they want to. Go to whatever school they want to, whether it's by money or proximity to home, whatever. They're adults. Well, the adults are making rules for the adults. And it's for the adults at home and in the stands watching, which is a big reason why they're so popular and get paid what they paid. So all these people complaining about this is manipulating player safety, okay. I mean, as long as you're not doing something with concussions to manipulate that, or you're not harboring these injuries that really do affect player safety, like, you're not allowed to pull a player into the first down marker, or you're not allowed to push a player, kind of like the old Bush push stuff. That was for safety reasons. As long as you're not putting those rules back into play, or concussion protocol, you're taking that away, I have no issue with stuff like this. Cool. It's a better product. I have no issue with it whatsoever. Players know the risk. They're adults. They make their decisions. You can get hurt in just playing just about any sport. Stop complaining. All right. I think that's all we got for today. Boy, it felt good to talk for an hour, not have to cough for one single frickin' second. I'm sure Jamil appreciated that more than anyone, especially the fans, y'all listening wherever you are. Appreciate y'all listening. Be sure to hit that like button, share button, comment button, subscribe if you haven't already. Short week. We're only going to do today and tomorrow, but we'll be same time tomorrow, 3 p.m. LSU basketball men's plays tonight. I won't recap the game unless they win, which would be awesome. But as far as the future of Matt McMahon, all that stuff, we'll talk about anything else, and then preview the Round Rock Classic this weekend. Appreciate y'all. Appreciate Jamil. Like that page, share the post. Check us out on Spotify later when I post it up to our website. See y'all tomorrow. Appreciate it.